Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a story. The story is titled, The Mischievous Cat Who Loved to Climb. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you appreciate me. You can skip this if you don't like this video. Thank you very much. The story begins as follows. There was once a mischievous cat named Whiskers who lived in a cozy little house on the edge of a quiet village. Whiskers was no ordinary cat. While most cats enjoyed lounging in the sun or chasing after mice, Whiskers had one great passion: climbing. He wasn't content with climbing trees or fences like regular cats. He aimed higher, much higher. From a young age, Whiskers had been fascinated by the heights. As a kitten, he would attempt to scale everything in sight, from the garden shed to the highest bookshelf in the living room. His owner, Mrs. Thompson, would often find him perched on top of the refrigerator or hanging from the curtains, his wide green eyes gleaming with pride. "Whiskers, get down from there, you little rascal," Mrs. Thompson would exclaim, waving her hands in the air as if that could make him descend. But Whiskers was a determined cat, and once he set his sights on a new height, there was no stopping him. He would leap, scramble, and twist his body into the strangest positions just to reach that next high point. One day, Mrs. Thompson noticed something unusual. Whiskers had disappeared for hours, which was rare because he was always in her sight. After a frantic search, Mrs. Thompson looked up at the very top of her house, where she spotted a tiny flicker of white fur against the clear blue sky. Whiskers was sitting comfortably on the chimney. His tail swayed back and forth, as if he had discovered the most peaceful spot in the world. "Whiskers, how on earth did you get up there?" Mrs. Thompson cried. Whiskers merely blinked and gave a lazy stretch, looking down at her with his trademark cheeky smile. Clearly, climbing to new heights was an adventure he couldn't resist. After the chimney incident, Whiskers' climbing obsession only grew stronger. He began to devise new ways to reach even more exciting heights. One of his favorite new challenges was the roof of Mrs. Thompson's house. He had learned that the window in the attic offered an easy route to the top, and every chance he got, Whiskers would leap from the window ledge, nimbly making his way up to the roof like a cat-shaped mountain goat. Mrs. Thompson, however, wasn't so enthusiastic. Every time she went to the attic to store old holiday decorations, she would find Whiskers lounging happily on the roof, looking as though he were the king of the world. On one particular afternoon, she decided to teach him a lesson. "Whiskers, enough is enough," she shouted, standing beneath the roof, shaking her head. "You're going to get yourself stuck one of these days." But Whiskers just yawned and curled up in a patch of sunlight, completely unconcerned. It wasn't long before he had made it his personal mission to climb every building in the neighborhood. Whiskers had earned a bit of a reputation as the most daring cat around, and soon his adventures were the talk of the village. One morning, Whiskers set out on what he thought would be his grandest feat yet: the church steeple. He had watched the birds fly up there and had grown determined to join them. He waited until Mrs. Thompson was busy, then darted off toward the tall spire. When he reached the base of the steeple, he looked up and thought, why not? For hours, Whiskers scaled the narrow spire, his claws clicking against the stone. Villagers who passed by couldn't believe their eyes. "Is that a cat on the steeple?" they gasped. Whiskers reached the top with a triumphant meow, gazing down at the tiny figures below. But when it was time to come down, Whiskers realized he might have overestimated his skills. He was stuck. The crowd below watched in suspense, and Mrs. Thompson, breathless with worry, rushed to the scene. A few firemen, a ladder, and several treats later, Whiskers was safely back on solid ground, though slightly embarrassed. After the church steeple incident, Mrs. Thompson thought that Whiskers had finally learned his lesson. But Whiskers, true to his mischievous nature, wasn't done with climbing just yet. Instead, he had simply become more creative. One afternoon, while Mrs. Thompson was tending to her garden, Whiskers quietly made his way to the neighbor's house, where a large oak tree stretched high above. He climbed the tree with ease, much to the surprise of the neighbor, Mr. Anderson, who was sitting on his porch sipping tea. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" Mr. Anderson called, squinting up at the tree. Whiskers, looking down at him with a sly grin, responded with a loud meow and leapt to the highest branch. He had no intention of coming down any time soon. Mr. Anderson shook his head and chuckled. "That cat is impossible." Later that evening, Mrs. Thompson found Whiskers up in the tree again, completely relaxed and enjoying the view. She sighed, wondering if there was ever a way to stop him. But deep down, she couldn't help but admire his adventurous spirit. Perhaps it was just part of being Whiskers. And so, the climbing cat continued his daring adventures, never satisfied with the heights he had reached, always on the lookout for the next thrilling challenge. Mrs. Thompson learned to live with it, and while she might have scolded him once in a while, she couldn't help but smile every time she saw Whiskers atop something high, looking down with pride. After all, what's life without a little mischief?